Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ralph Bagnall. I'm the technical specialist for MICROJIG, coming to you from sunny Orlando, Florida today, and being hosted by the Factor Makerspace here in Orlando. Today we're going to go over the entire MICROJIG line, show you how to use each piece, some of the things that you can do with it, and how to make your woodworking safer and more accurate. Now, for anybody who's interested in the Orlando area, you can find out about membership with the Factor Makerspace at factor.org. FACTUR.org will get you to their website and you can check it out. So let's get started. The gripper is what we refer to as a 3D push block. And what I mean by that is that we're going to control our stock in three directions of motion. Obviously, I'm going to hold the stock down on the table while I'm cutting it. And obviously, I'm going to be pushing it through the blade. What's not as obvious is, as I'm pushing through, I'm going to control the rip and the off-fall side of my piece, both sides of the kerf, keeping them parallel to the blade throughout the travel. When you use a push stick, what you're doing is you're pushing on the very back corner of the stock, whether it's large or small. You're generally pushing on one point of contact at the very back. And when you do that, the friction of the part on the table wants to drag it out. It's going to move away from the fence. And there's not much you can do about it. But with the gripper, we're not going to be pushing from the back. We're going to be holding onto the part using this proprietary high friction rubber material that are on the legs of your gripper. So we're going to be holding it from the top, and because there's a length of the rubber here, we're going to keep this part from being able to move side to side as we make our cut. Now let me show you how that works. I've got my blade set to just above the top of the material, and I put my material against the fence. I like to set the gripper down on top of it and push it over so that I know everything's tight to the fence. Now I want you to notice what just happened there. Not only did I cut the part, both the rip and the off-fall side of the part completed the cut all the way through the blade. My off-fall isn't sitting here rubbing against the blade. I was also able to return both the rip and the off-fall piece all the way around my saw back to where I'm working here. I'm not reaching across the spinning blade to get my parts. And the result here is the part is basically the same size as it started. I've just removed a kerf. And you'll notice that the cut is extremely clean. The reason is that when you start to make your cut, the teeth of the blade are wider than the body of the blade. And so once the part passes the first set of teeth that cut it, it's free to move back here away from the fence. And when you see burning and tool marks on your pieces after you're done making a rip cut, that's from the rear teeth coming up out of the saw, rubbing against that part that can move. Not only does it spoil your cut, but more importantly, those burn marks and tool marks are a warning sign that you're rubbing against the back teeth, and if one of those teeth happens to catch the part, this piece can kick back at you. It's a leading cause of kickback. The gripper reduces the opportunity for that kickback dramatically because we're keeping control of both parts all the way through the cut. So it's much safer in that respect. Also, you'll notice that the gripper is designed so that the three legs create tunnels, and we can set them so that the blade goes through the tunnel underneath the gripper when I'm making my cut. The gripper becomes a moving blade guard. If I'm in the middle of a cut and something horrible happens, the damage is done to my gripper and not to my hand. And that's a very important part. You can replace the individual legs of a gripper if they get damaged without having to replace the entire gripper. So you've got the opportunity here to protect your hands, get safer cutting, and get better and more accurate cutting. Now this piece that we've already ripped, I want to rip it again. So I'm going to come down here and drop my blade down to an appropriate height. I'm going to set my gripper on it just like before, but obviously this is a problem. we do not want the gripper to be able to rock side to side while we're making our cut. Every GR100 and every GR200 that we sell comes with the balance support, which is this piece here, and it acts as an outrigger. All I have to do is loosen the nuts, drop the balance support to the tabletop, and now my gripper is supported and stabilized as I make my cut. Now you'll also notice that if I cut this piece right now, the off-fall, it's not under control here. It can come flying back out at me, and I don't want that to happen. So the center leg is adjustable from side to side and allows me to set up so that I can hold that off-fall as well. I'm still controlling both sides of the part. Now I'm very close to the blade with my center leg here, so a good habit to get into is when after you're set up, remove the stock and make a test pass without the blade spinning. If I'm going to hit the blade, I'll feel it here. But now I'm good to go. So now I can set this piece in there and make that cut. Now there's the piece I wanted to keep. This is my off-fall. If I don't want to lose this part, if it's valuable, something ebony or wangy or something valuable that I want to keep, with the gripper, I don't have to lose it. I've got the ability to cut that down as well, and I get excellent cut quality working with very small parts without any worry about my fingers being in danger from working with these small parts. Now, as you work with the gripper, the basic body of the gripper gives you, with the 1/4 inch leg against the fence, you can work out to about 3 inches of width of rip and still have a leg on each side. Or if I reverse the gripper, because it's completely reversible, with the 1/4 inch leg on the outside, I can get out to about 3 1/4. So as I rip anywhere from that 3 1/4 to down to 1/4 of an inch, okay, in this case, my center leg's in the way. It's going to get cut by my blade. Obviously, I don't want that. The center leg can be moved to either side, giving me the ability to set up the cut the way I want without having to worry about cutting into the bottom of my gripper. We want to avoid cutting into the bottom of the gripper whenever possible, but it will happen, and when it does, again, the 3 legs are all individually replaceable, which makes it great. Now, if you need a little bit of extra room, let's say we want to cut something about 4 inches wide, well, the gripper at the table saw is always used up against the fence. It always rides the fence. We never ever freehand with a gripper. But I can add the balance support to one side, the rip fence side, and notice I can add it on, no tools needed. I can let that ride against the fence. My gripper is still guiding off the fence, and now I can get an extra 2 inches of cut capacity because this is 2 inches wide. And now I've got the ability to do whatever cutting I need to do utilizing the gripper. So for cuts from 1/4 of an inch wide up to 1/2 an inch wide, I'm going to use the 1/4 inch leg against the fence. Once I get up above 1/2 inch wide, I want as much green grip material holding my rip part as I can have, so I'll switch to the 1/2 inch side, and then I can move forward from there. Now, one of the reasons that we talk about having 2 grippers rather than just a single one, for shorter parts, a single gripper is what you're typically going to use. But when you start doing longer stock, we're going to make a rip cut on a piece of longer stock. The problem is if I'm using a single gripper, I can't start it back here because I'm not on the table, and if I start it here, then I'm not controlling my stock in the back. But with 2 grippers, I can actually utilize a hand-over-hand technique. I can start with one gripper, engage the blade, bring the second gripper back around, and continue the cut. And if the piece is long, I can come in with my first gripper back around again, and I can keep doing this so I can make one long, smooth rip cut down a board without having to stop. It's like using a power feeder without the setup. When you rip a long board, typically what you do is you start your rip, you shift your grip, you You keep ripping, you shift your grip. And every time you stop, no matter how good your saw is, no matter how good your blade is, there's a little bit of run out and vibration in there. And so what happens is, everywhere you stopped, you will see where that blade was rubbing against the piece, and that needs to be removed. Well, with the overhand technique that I just showed you, we don't have to ever stop. We're going to bring each gripper in, and notice what I like to do is set the gripper on and still bring it over before I engage the blade so that I know everything stays tight against the fence. And that gives me the ability to do long rips at the table saw very cleanly and very nicely. It's a wonderful technique at the table saw. It's even better at the router table. If you're doing, especially if you're making moldings or trim work, and you've got your bit set in there and you need to, if you're continually shifting your grip, you're going to get those tool marks and the burn marks in your molding, which you then have to go sand out, and nobody wants to sand moldings. So with the gripper, once again, I can come in and start the feed and continue the feed right through one smooth, clean motion. You'll be surprised at how clean you can get the moldings that you make at the table saw or at the router table. Now also notice that the sides of the gripper are perpendicular to the feed. So if I'm doing a molding this way on the router table, like with a base molding for trim work, I can actually use my grippers on their sides just as effectively as I can standing up. So it gives us the ability to really work in both areas. The other thing I like the gripper for at the router table, if I'm not using the fence, if I put a bearing bit in here and I want to round over the top of a piece or whatever, the gripper allows me to hold on to that part, get the control of it I need, and engage that bearing without my hands being anywhere near it. And again, if something goes dreadfully wrong, the gripper takes the damage. My hand is still 3 inches above the tool. So it's always a good idea to use the grippers basically anywhere you want to manipulate wood in the shop. The bandsaw is another place I like to use the grippers. I can set if I'm doing resawing on the bandsaw, I can set my fence, stick the part up against it, and again I'm going to use the gripper on its side up against my part and be able to feed it through the blade while keeping it tight up against the fence, both top and bottom. And when I get to the end of that cut, I don't have to worry about it springing off or the part falling through suddenly and having my thumbs in the way. I'm not doing this anymore. Now I've got my hand well away from the blade. So the gripper gives me the ability to control my stock no matter where I am in the shop. Jointer, table saw, bandsaw, router table, I use the grippers all over my shop. Now, we sell two different models of the gripper. There's the GR100 and the GR200. What you see here is the GR100. This is the gripper body with the handle. You get a 1/4 inch leg, a 1/2 inch leg, and the adjustable center leg. And then you have the balance support, which we saw a little while ago. The GR200 is exactly the same kit, but it comes with the adjustable spacer and the stabilizing plate. Now let me give you an example of why those are useful and important. Let's start with the adjustable spacer. You remember earlier I was talking about being able to work out to about 3 1/4 inches and still have a leg on each side of your gripper. Well, I actually talked yesterday to a gentleman who was asking me about cutting a 45 in a 2x4. He was taking the corner off a 2x4, and the distance from the fence just set up so that the blade came out of the 2x4 right where that leg was going to be. Well, simple answer. The adjustable spacer is 1 inch thick. It attaches to the side of the gripper just like the balance support does, and it can attach to either side of the gripper because it's reversible. So I can lock that into place, and I've just given myself an extra inch of cutting capacity without moving my rip fence. So I've gotten the leg out of the way of the cut that he was talking about. So the adjustable spacer gives you that ability. On the other side of the blade, if you are set up at a 3, you're out working at the limit of the gripper, in this case, if my off-fall piece were particularly large, I might not want to rely on just this one section of grip material to hold a large off-fall piece. Well, the adjustable spacer comes with the green grip material on it. I can mount it to the outside of my gripper and give myself extra material to hold that off-fall part. So it can really be configured the way I want it. One of the things I like at the router table is using the adjustable spacer upside down on the gripper. And the reason being, I can mount it not only with the green grip material up, but with the spacer above my gripper, the leg of the gripper. And here's why you would want to do that. There are several types of router bits that when you cut with them, the bit itself is exposed above the top corner of your material. A bullnose bit that's going to round over this piece completely, a beading bit, or a tongue and groove bit. Many bits will actually have material exposed, or the bit exposed on the top of your material. If you run your gripper across the router table fence like this, that bit is going to cut right into your leg. Well, with the adjustable spacer mounted up above, I've now got a gap for that bit to run through. The bit can pass underneath, clear of the leg of my gripper. It's an inch away back here, and this is about a 3/8 inch gap above. That's typically enough to be able to do those kind of cuts on my router table without damaging my gripper. So the adjustable spacer is one of the, comes with the 200, and it's definitely an advantage to have it. If you happen to already own a GR100 and you want to upgrade, get the adjustable spacer and the stabilizing plate, you can do that. There is an upgrade kit available. Check with your local retailer, and if they don't have it, you can come directly to MICROJIG and we'll set you up. Now the other piece I like that we're going to talk about that comes with the GR200 is the stabilizing plate. And I want you to think about the stabilizing plate sort of as a replacement for a feather board. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set up a cut. I'm going to cut a piece 1.5 inches wide. And I'm going to use my gripper the normal way. I'll set it up like this. Put the leg over there. Now I'm controlling, even though I'm cutting it 1.5 inches, I put my center leg over here. I don't know how wide this piece is, but I don't have to know. I've got the 1/2 inch leg controlling the rip side, the center leg controlling the off-fall side. I can make this cut successfully. And I'm going to add my stabilizing plate just because I like, anytime I've got a leg of the gripper off the material, I like the stabilizing plate there just to be on the safe side. All right. So now we're going to make that cut. And now what I want to do is I want to resaw this piece 1/4 inch thick. So I'm going to run the blade up, and the setup is exactly like the setup that we started with at the beginning of all of this. I'm going to use my 1/4 inch leg against the fence. I'm going to drop my balance support down to the table to support my gripper, and I'm going to adjust my center leg so that it can manage the off-fall. This is the same setup that we did when we made the 2 little thin strips earlier. The problem is that I'm standing on top of a relatively narrow piece on its edge, and I really have nothing guaranteeing that that bottom is tight up against the fence. I'm controlling the top but not the bottom. Now without the gripper, if you're using a push stick, you'd put a feather board here to hold the part while it goes into the blade. The problem with a feather board is it's pressing against the off-fall piece, which is going to deflect it into the blade, which is going to deflect the blade into my keeper, and now I'm back to tool marks, burning, and all that good stuff, or bad stuff. The stabilizing plate attaches directly to my gripper on the balance support. I can set it against the bottom of that part. It's now holding that part at the bottom, but not pushing on it. It's just holding it. And then I'll drop my gripper back down on top, and the stabilizing plate is reversible. I'm going to lift it up. On one side, it's got a hook on the back for short pieces like this. The other side is flat. If I were doing a long rip like this, I could do it with 2 grippers set up with the stabilizing plate, and I'd use the flat side so that the hook wouldn't be in my way. But now, I'm going to be able to resaw this piece at the table saw. This is a very tricky cut. Most of us are not comfortable making this type of cut, but literally, it took me longer to explain it than it did to set up and make the cut. Oh, looks like I caught a little bit of my green grip material there. Obviously, I'm not quite a 1/4 of an inch away from the fence, and so you can see here that's the green grip material. It just rubs off. But notice, I'm always happy to see green on my parts and not red. So the gripper gives me the ability to do this kind of cutting, and the stabilizing plate makes it very easy. The other thing I like this for is at the router table. If you want to mill a small part at the router table, let's say my bit is here and I'm coming across it on the fence. Small parts, obviously holding it with your fingers here is not a good idea. And there's always especially when using larger bits, there's always the possibility of catching a knot or something and having it throw back at you. Well, with the stabilizing plate, once again, I can come in, control that part, keep it tight against the fence, and my gripper is going to hold it down. So I'm holding it against the fence and down all at the same time with my gripper, and I've got the ability to control this part, and you get good clean cuts on the router table without risking my fingers. So just to recap, this here is the GR100, and then the GR200 is exactly the same unit with the adjustable spacer and the stabilizing plate. You guys got any questions about the gripper or anything I've shown you so far? All right, excellent. Now, let's talk about some of the accessories that come available for the gripper. One of my favorites, and certainly one of our most popular seller, is an 1/8 inch leg for the gripper. The gripper comes with a 1/4 inch leg and a 1/2 inch leg, but there's a lot of times when you'd want to be able to get right down to cutting at 1/8 of an inch wide. And the 1/8 inch leg allows you to do that. Now, it is very important to remember when you're trying to do very thin cuts like this, you need a good zero clearance insert. I need this little lip right here to be exposed. Otherwise, if I try to use the factory insert that comes with my table saw, this gap is going to be much larger and my part's going to fall down inside, and that's dangerous. So you need a good zero clearance insert. The 1/8 inch leg can be mounted to the gripper by removing one of the existing legs and replacing it with the 1/8 inch leg. I actually prefer to simply bolt it to the outside of my gripper using the provided screws, and it screws right into the same fittings in the gripper that the balance support and the adjustable spacer use. And I can just attach it right to my gripper. I like to do it to the 1/2 inch leg side because that gives me the most green grip material as close to the blade as I can possibly make it. So now I'm going to use my balance support on the outside because, again, I'm using a narrow piece. And with a narrow piece, you always want to have the gripper balanced on the off side so that it doesn't fall down on you or wiggle. Now I'm going to do my test pass just to make sure I'm not going to cut into my gripper. I didn't do it the last time and it caught me. See? Got to come out just a little bit. There we go. So now we can make a thin rip using this setup. So not only can we do thin rips on the table saw, but we can do them and get amazing results. The 1/8 inch leg, I like it for when I do a lot of bentwood laminations, and so I could rip a whole bunch of strips of 1/8 inch thick, wrap them around a form with glue, and come up with a bentwood lamination. Doing it with the gripper on the table saw, I don't have to belt sand these or drum sand them or something like you would if you did them on the bandsaw. They come out clean and ready to go to glue, and they're going to be all consistently exactly the same thickness. And I can set up 2 grippers just like I had here and actually use the hand-over-hand technique to cut long, thin strips of 1/8" material. I also like it because I do a lot of my own inlay bandings for furniture projects. So I can use the 1/8" leg to make small shapes in different colored woods. You glue them up into a plank, and then you have to resaw that plank into veneer pieces. Well, I can make all of my inlays exactly 1/8 of an inch thick, or exactly whatever thickness I want from 1/8 inch up. And when I go to plow the inlay groove that they're all going to go in, they're all going to be exactly the same thickness. And that's important because now you only have to plow one groove, do your inlay, and walk away. So the 1/8" leg is by far our most popular accessory. Now, one of the new accessories that we like a lot is the gravity heel, which mounts to the back side of the gripper, usually the off blade side, and allows me to, I can lock it into place as an extra heel to help me push things if I'm concerned about getting the material all the way through the blade. On normal wood, it's not a problem. But if you're cutting plastics or laminated materials, Corian, melamine, sometimes they're very, very slick. They have a very smooth surface, and the gravity heel gives you the ability to have a physical heel at the end to help you push it through. But the problem with locking it is if you're doing the hand-over-hand thing, I can loosen the knob and it allows the heel to move out of the way, but when I get to the back of the part, it drops into place and it takes up the slack and lets me push it through. The heel part is designed to be sacrificial. It is designed to be cut through. And one of the reasons I'm showing it to you now is this particular setup I like a lot. When I'm doing thin rips with the 1/8" leg, especially long pieces, if I'm ripping a 4-foot piece and I'm doing the hand-over-hand thing, when you get to the end of a 4-foot piece, this 1/8" wide piece of green grip material may not quite be enough to get that all the way through the blade the way I want it to. The gravity heel will allow me to, and what will end up happening is I'm going to cut a little bit of a groove in the back of it, so I'll have an 1/8" leg hanging down here that will push my part through. And we can show that right now. So I'm going to go ahead and make that cut, bring the gravity heel back so it drops off the end, and now I can make my cut, and I know that the gravity heel will keep everything in line. See, we've got so now I can rip 1/8" strips all day long, and the kit, the accessory comes with 5 of these heels because they are designed to be sacrificial, and we also have a replacement set where you can buy just the heels. You only need to buy the hardware for it once. So that's the gravity heel accessory for the gripper. It's been out just about 2 years now, right, Henry?
Yeah. Is that tapered? The gravity heel is tapered so it drops down.
Exactly, and so because the 2 pieces are tapered against each other, the more snug you have the nut, the less it drops. And what you want to make sure of is that the heel drops below the top of your material, but not so far down that if you're coming in from the edge of the saw, you're going to catch the table. And so, but you can adjust the knob to adjust how far the gravity heel falls down after you go off the end of the part. Now, for those of you who are a little bit more observant, you'll have noticed that the 2 grippers I'm playing with here are not quite exactly the same. And I'm going to show you the other one of the other accessories that we have that I like a lot, and that's the handle bridge kit. So as you can see, these 2 grippers are not quite exactly the same. The bodies are the same, the handles are the same. This one is outfitted with our handle bridge kit. When you assemble your gripper as it comes out of the box, you want the handle centered on the gripper body. And the reason being that when I press down on it, I want to make sure that the pressure is even across the bottom of my gripper. If I angle the handle or put it off to one side or the other for any reason, what's going to happen is I'm going to have more pressure on one side of the gripper than the other, or on more, opposite corners or whatever, it's not going to be balanced. The handle bridge kit is a true bridge. There's an actual gap under the center here. And so when I push down on the handle, even though this one's at an angle, the force is directed out to the four corners where it's bolted to the gripper body. And so because this is centered, the pressure on the bottom of my gripper remains centered. So I can set the handle at an angle, which in this case for me, I happen to like it angled so that the front of the handle is a little bit toward the fence. I know some other people like it angled the other way. Whatever works for your hand, you can set up here. And if you're ripping all day long, that little bit of ergonomics does make a difference. But the other important aspect of it is when you're using your gripper on its side, I can just loosen the handle up here. And this goes for the bandsaw, the router table, or the table saw. There we go. I can loosen the handle, bring it all the way up as high as I can reach. And now I've got a little more knuckle room underneath here, so I'm not rubbing against the tabletop, but the pressure on the bottom of the gripper is going to remain even because I'm still on the bridge. So the handle bridge kit gives me the ability to set up my gripper the way I need to set it up, either for my own comfort or in this case, in the case of raising the handle for the cut I'm making. Now you'll also notice that the handle bridge kit has some fittings on the end. These are for another accessory that we make, which is the deflector connector. This is a piece of polycarbonate. It's a high impact plastic. So, and it's clear, so I can mount it to the fittings that are on my handle bridge kit. There we go. Let's get it on there first. It's because I can't see what I'm doing. So I can mount it. I can mount this to either side of my gripper. So if I'm cutting something like aluminum, and I've cut a lot of aluminum on the table saw, the chips, aluminum, phenolic, brass, the chips from that hurt. So if the blade's going underneath the gripper, then we're good to go. The gripper is going to become my chip guard. But here, I've got a chip guard built in with the deflector connector. I really like this at the router table. If you're using the bearing bit, when you're using a bearing bit on the router table, the fence is backed away. You have no dust collection whatsoever. So the deflector connector not only keeps the chips from flying back at my face, but it also adds one more layer of barrier between my fingers and the bit. So I really like it at the router table. But we call it a connector because if you have two grippers that are equipped with the handle bridge kit, you can actually mount them side by side to make one wide gripper and give yourself a lot more rip capacity. Or you can use the knobs front to back. Oh, that's why that little O-ring was in the way. And I can actually mount the deflector connector this way, connect two grippers together the long way, so when I'm ripping longer stock, for really long boards, I prefer the hand-over-hand method. But if I've got a bunch of boards that I want to rip about this size, then two grippers connected together by the deflector connector gives me one gripper that will handle that board, and I don't have to worry about that. I can just rip all my stock and never have to change my hand positions. So the deflector connector can act as a deflector, but it also can act as a connector between your grippers, allow you to use them together. All right. That's it for accessories. So I've just covered the grippers, some of the basic ways that you use them and how they work, as well as the accessories. Any questions on any of that at this point? All right. So we're going to move on to the tapering jig.
Here's a quick question, Ralph.
Go ahead.
What are some of the main things that
How much time have you got? To be honest with you, the question was, what do I usually use my grippers for? And I can tell you that in my personal shop, it's a rare day that I don't actually pick up and use my grippers for something. I use them when I'm resawing at the bandsaw. Almost any cuts that I make at the router table are being done with the grippers, or possibly the grip block that I'll show you later. Anytime I'm ripping at the table saw and the fence is, as far as I'm concerned, 6 inches or closer to the blade, I'm using the grippers. I don't want my hand anywhere near that blade. The grippers give me the ability to control the stock. So it's really hard to say. I use them all the time. It's constant for me, constant use.
And what would be like some instances like that wouldn't make sense? When would you not use it?
If I've got a piece of plywood that I've cut down and I'm ripping it down to a 38-inch wide rip, I'm way over here working. I'm nowhere near the blade. So the grippers don't necessarily get me anything there, but to be honest with you, a lot of times I still have them in my hand because not only do they hold the material better than my hand can, there's a lot more friction there, I don't get splinters that way. So realistically speaking, it's only with much larger parts that I don't use the grippers. Anything, like I said, if the rip fence is anywhere near, and obviously I don't use my grippers when I'm cross-cutting, using the miter gauge. But anytime I'm ripping and the rip fence is 6 inches or closer to the blade, there's no question I'll have a gripper in my hands. All right, the tapering jig. Now the first thing I want to say about the tapering jig is don't let it intimidate you. When you see this with all of these knobs and everything on it, it looks on the outset very complicated, but it's not. It's really as simple to use as 1, 2, 3 taper. And what I mean by that is, one, we're going to set an angle on our taper jig. And number two, we're going to mark our part where we want the taper to start. Let's say right there. So that's where we're going to start our taper on this part. And then number three, we're going to set the rip fence so that the tapering jig is adjusted so that the part is going to meet the blade at that mark I just made. So set the angle, mark the part where you want the taper to start, set the rip fence so that the mark that you made is going to contact the blade where it disappears underneath the insert plate, the throat plate, and you're ready to cut. Now, this piece, could I get away with holding it like this by hand? I could. No way am I even going to try. If something dreadful happens and this piece gets yanked out of my hand's going to go with it right into the blade. And the tapering jig is designed to work with the gripper. So all of these complicated knobs, well, 4 of them right here are accounted for by attachment points for the gripper. I've got 5 slots and 4 knobs. I can attach 1 or 2 grippers anywhere along this edge that I need them. And then I'm going to raise my gripper up, set my part in place. There's a hook in the back here that the part rests against, and I can drop my gripper down on top of the part. Now I'm ready to cut. Oh look, I've got a problem here. Okay, I'm going to cut into that leg if I cut this the way it is, and it's just the angle and the length of the piece. So in this case, I'm just going to remove the outer leg completely. And if I were cutting a narrower taper, maybe I would just have to move the center leg. But in this case, I can remove the outer leg, bring my center leg over so that it's supporting as much of the material as possible, and now I can make the cut. Now once again though, I always want to make a test pass just to make sure nothing's going to get in the way. So we set an angle, we marked it on the part, we set the rip fence, and now we can cut the taper. Very quick, very easy, and very, very clean. So, now that we've seen how easy this is to use, let's take a minute and look at the details of what I just went through. The microdial tapering jig, essentially, the process of cutting a taper is the same for this jig as for any other tapering jig. You've got 2 pieces that move against each other to form an angle, and then that supports your part. What sets the tapering jig, the microdial, apart from other tapering jigs are these two items here, which are the microdials. Typically what happens is when I want to cut a taper, with other taper jigs, what you have to do is mark your taper on the part, and then you line that line up with the miter slot, and then you try to adjust the taper jig and the rip fence at the same time so that that part's being supported. We don't have to go through any of that. What we're going to do in this case is the microdials have presets in them for the angles that you want to cut. The lower microdial here, if you know the angle you want to cut, that's what this is used for. If you don't know the angle but you know the rise over run, we're going to use the second microdial. Let's look at the angle one first. You'll notice that the scale is graduated from 0 to 10 degrees of angle, but it's graduated by eighths of a degree. Now, in 30 years of woodworking, I've never needed more precise angles than an eighth of a degree. So you'll also notice that the scale is color-coded. Each line on here is a different color, one of 4 colors. So you'll also notice that on the microdial there's 5 pointers and 4 of them are color-coded. So if we want to cut an angle of, let's say, 3 5/8 of a degree, well, we look at our scale, 3 5/8 is green. So I'm going to lift and turn the microdial to use the green pointer. I'm going to loosen my lock knob, and I'm going to slide this over until I'm close to that green mark, and then there's a pin underneath each of these pointers that's going to drop into one of those little holes, like so. I've just locked in a preset 3 5/8 degree angle. Now, I don't want the little pin underneath here to try and hold this all together while I'm making my cut, so we have a lock knob that locks them together. So now, when I go to make my cut, I've already set my angle. Now I can do the rest of it, and I'm going to get a 3 1/8 degree angle. Well, let's say I want to cut the taper on one side of this piece, and then I want to cut the same taper on the other side. Well, anytime you're cutting a taper and you've already got the taper against the jig, the 2 tapers cancel themselves out. And so what'll happen is you'll get a straight edge along here and it won't cut. You have to double the angle. That's true of a flat part like this. It's especially true when doing table legs, which we'll talk about in a minute. So we need to double the angle. Well, again, I don't have to draw the angle on this piece and try to line it up and do all the other stuff. We're at 3 5/8, so now we're going to go to 7 1/4. That's going to be 3 5/8 times 2 is 7 1/4. That's a black line in this case, so we're going to switch to the black pointer. We're going to come out to 7 1/4, and we're going to let that pin drop into place. I've just doubled my angle. I'm done. It's that quick and easy to double the angle. So if you know the angle that you want to cut, the lower scale and the lower microdial is what you use. But a lot of times we don't know what the angle is, especially when you're tapering table legs. Okay? I don't know what the angle is to go from an 1.5 inch square piece of stock down to 1 inch at the bottom of the foot for a table leg. But I do know that I want to cut a 12-inch long taper and I want to remove 1/4 inch from each side. Well, this upper scale is for when you know the rise over run, which is what that's called. Here we can go from 0 to 2 inches, and that's the amount we're removing from the bottom of the taper, the wide point of the wedge. I don't have that wedge piece here, do I? Oh, here it is. So on this scale, what we're measuring is this width here at the bottom of my taper. This is set up for a 12-inch long taper. So at the bottom of a 12-inch long taper, I can set for removal of anywhere from 0 to 2 inches by 1/16 of an inch. So we said we want to remove 1/4. Well, that's going to be 4/16. Now we're going to use the red pointer. We're going to slide, just like the lower section, we're going to slide it over until we're close to that red mark, and we let the pin drop in, lock it down. Now I'm going to cut 1/4 inch at the bottom of a 12-inch taper. Well, what if your taper isn't 12 inches? Well, if it's 24 inches, the taper is going to get wider as it gets longer, so we're going to divide, and a 24-inch taper to remove a quarter at the bottom would be 2/16. Or let's say it was a 6-inch taper. Now since it's going to be narrower at the bottom, we've got to double that, so that would be 8. So there's a very simple math formula that you can use to set up for whatever length taper you want, and the manual that comes with the tapering jig gives you a chart that gives you all of the general conversions without having to do the math. So that's very easy. Again though, let's say we're tapering a leg. When we taper sides 1 and 2, we're going to use this setting. But when we go to taper sides 3 and 4, we have to double the angle because we're going to have the taper up against the jig. Well, here, doubling the angle becomes simplicity itself. We don't have to draw anything out and try and figure anything out. We're going to go from 4 to 8, and that's red to red, so I don't even have to turn my microdial. All I got to do is put the pointer at 8, let the pin drop down in, and lock down the jig. I will have to readjust the rip fence because I just made the jig a little bit wider, but the ability to set it immediately to the accurate point you want and the repeatability that you get with the microdial tapering jig is what sets this apart from most. I can make a set of legs today, and a year from now I can make a matching leg as long as the stock I'm using is the same size and I use the same settings on the taper jig. I'm going to get matching legs, and that's really, really important, and it's incredibly difficult to do with a standard tapering jig because you don't have all the presets, you don't have all the accuracy. Now the other thing the tapering jig has as an advantage going for it is we can set it to 0 and use it as a straight line rip jig. So I've got a taper cut on this piece right now. Let's say it was a a rough piece of board. Well, I can't ride that against my table saw fence because it's not safe. But what I can do is I can set it into my tapering jig and set up to just rip that right off using a gripper on top, and I can straight line the back side of this. If you don't have a jointer, this is an important aspect because now you can take a piece of rough lumber, set it on here, and as long as it's not overly long, you can get a clean rip on one side, which from there you can rip it to width and do whatever else you need to do with it. So warped boards, twisted boards, the tapering jig gives you the ability to start that clean, fresh edge that you need to work off of. If it's a really large piece, like a live edge, if you're making a live edge shelf or something, and you've got the live edge, obviously that can't ride against the fence, and it's not going to hook onto the little notch back here, but we can put the tapering jig on top of it, let it ride there, use our gripper to hold it if needed, adjust it where we want, and rip a clean straight line right across the back. Even though there's no reference point on the front, the jig becomes my reference point on the fence. And for large pieces like that, the tapering jig comes with a little heel here that connects along the back of your tapering jig to give you a physical pusher to help push that piece through. So we give you the ability to control large and small pieces as you're cutting tapers, whether you're doing straight line ripping or cutting tapers with the tapering jig. It gives you a lot of capabilities and a lot of repeatability. And then the final thing, you'll notice there's 2 little knobs here with these molded pieces underneath them. These are memory stops. If you're going to cut the same angles over and over again in a production fashion, you can set an angle to wherever you want, whether you use the microdial or use an actual piece that you want to copy. However you set the angle, you can then bring these memory stops over, lock them into place, set your second angle, lock this one into place, and now I can go from angle back and forth without having to use the microdial and reset it each and every time. If I'm doing a production type run, I can go from one angle to the other rapidly and accurately over and over again. Typically, I don't do a lot of production work, but if I were making a pile of children's toys for Tots for Christmas, or doing some project like that, or making a bunch of pieces that are going to go together to form a lamp or whatever, when I need to make multiple parts at the same angle cuts, the memory stops give me the ability to lock those angles in and very, very rapidly change from one to the other without having to work through the microdials. So that's the tapering jig. Any questions on that from anybody? Cool. All right, next up is the grip block, which is, I consider it to be, honestly, a companion to the gripper rather than a replacement for. The grip block has the same green grip material on the bottom of it as the gripper does. It's molded in a slightly different pattern. It's dots instead of lines, and it is actually a much bigger footprint because we don't have to worry about where the blade's going to go. So the grip block has truly incredible gripping power for when you're doing heavy work that doesn't require cutting through. Obviously, I don't want to use it for ripping on my table saw because I'm going to cut into the bottom of my grip block. On the other hand, if I'm using a dado set in my table saw and I'm running a long piece through and I want to make sure that it stays down on top of that blade and I don't get a wavy bottom, the grip block is awesome for that because it gives you amazing traction and really, really powerful force to be able to push through. On the grip block, the side is also perpendicular to the face. So whether I'm at the router table or the table saw and I'm working a piece on edge, I can work it this way with the grip block. They're wonderful at the joiner because with the two grip blocks working on my joiner, joining a piece of stock, I can actually get to a flat part in fewer passes with the grip blocks than I can without. And the reason is that when you put a piece on the joiner, the whole reason you're doing it is because there's a bow in the board. If you use the standard blocks or push pads that come with the joiner, in order to get the traction to move that piece forward, you have to press downward so hard that you're actually artificially pressing the bow out of the board. Eventually the joiner will flatten the board because of the way it works, but it's going to take a lot of passes and the ends are going to get thin. With the grip block, I have so much extra grip on here that I can push down less and back against my rear fence on the jointer more. I can be pushing this way rather than that way more, which tends to not press that bow out, and I can make fewer passes, get a clean joint, and save a lot of material in doing it because my ends don't get as thin. I could save some stock and not necessarily remove as much material. I also love them at the router table for the same reason that I love the grippers. When I'm working at the router table, I've got control over my stock, and since this handle's a little farther down, it's a little less, the center of gravity is a little lower here, so it's a little more convenient. One of the drawbacks is, and again, the gripper is more versatile, here, because my part is narrow, this can rock a little bit more, and I don't have that balance support to keep it up. So the grip block, I like using it as a companion to rather than a replacement for my gripper. Now you'll also notice that the grip block has the smart hooks on the ends, on both ends. These act the same way that we talked about with the gravity heel on the gripper before. When I'm in the middle of my board, they stay out of the way, but when I get to the end, they drop down. Now, if I don't want to use them, I can snap them up and lock them out of the way, or I can just press them back down into play here. They work both horizontally and vertically. So again, when I'm at the bandsaw resawing, I can use the hooks, or I can snap them out of the way to not use the hooks, whichever I prefer. Just an interesting little point here. The smart hooks on the grip block came first. Henry developed these on the grip block, and we liked the way that they worked so much that he had to go back to the drawing board and develop the gravity heel system to go with the gripper to give them the same functionality there. So those actually predate the gravity heel, but they do the same thing. The other thing I like about the grip block is that you'll notice it has a pair of fittings here too, and they're spaced apart to be able to utilize the deflector connector with the grip block. And again, I love this at the router table when I'm trying to when I'm doing bearing guided routing, once again, I've got an extra chip guard and finger guard between me and the bit as I'm working. So this really gives me the ability to utilize the grip block in all sorts of places around my shop. I typically keep my grippers at the table saw where they're right where I need them to work, and I tend to keep the grip blocks. I have a rack on the back side of my jointer, and they live there, so I always know where they are, and they're always right there when I need them. We haven't had any questions from the Facebook crowd, Milton?
Not right now.
Okay. So any
They
questions?
just asked how much, but we took care of them.
Any questions on the grip block? Now, on both the grip block and the gripper, one of the things that you'll notice after you've been using them for a while is whether you're using your gripper or the grip block, sometimes you'll be pushing something and it'll start to, the gripper won't hold as well as you think it should be. It starts to get a little bit slick. It's not because the green grip material wears. It really doesn't wear out. I don't think we've ever had one wear out, because the stock is generally moving with your gripper, so there's no wear going on. And even if you did wear it a little bit, you're just exposing clean new material. But what does happen is the wax from your table saw, oils and resins from the wood, pitch and tar, those sorts of things, they can build up over time on this green grip material, on either of these products. I recommend under normal usage once every 6 months or so to clean the bottom of your grippers. Now, under normal use, if they get dust on them, you can just wipe them off on your pants or blow them off with an air hose. That's fine. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about oils and resin building up on the green grip material. Common rubbing alcohol or denatured alcohol are the right things to use to clean your grippers. Now, one way to do it is to take a shallow pan, pour about 1/8 of an inch of alcohol in the bottom of the pan, set your gripper down in it, let it sit for about 2 minutes, wipe it off with a cloth, and the gripper, you'll be amazed at how well it grips again, because the loss of grip is very slow. It happens gradually over time. And one day you'll notice it, and you'll say, well, I could use a little more grip. And then all of a sudden when you clean them, it's like, wow, I forgot how good they were. The other method that we've recently discovered that we like a lot is at most drugstores, you can buy a little squirt bottle already filled with a 91% alcohol solution. And so that you don't have to deal with the pan and everything else. A couple of squirts on the bottom of your gripper, wipe it with a clean cloth, and you'll be right back to work again. No, there is no glue here. The green grip material can't be glued to the plastic. It's actually molded in. We mold the plastic leg first, and then the leg goes into a second mold, and the green grip material is injection molded onto it. And if you look closely here at the inside of the 1/2 inch leg, you can see there's a little key there where we molded in, to lock it together and keep everything stiff. If the green grip material separates from your leg, usually that happens because you've cut into one edge of it and you've disturbed it. You need to replace the leg. You cannot re-glue it on there.
And where can they find the replacement parts?
Most of our, almost all of our retailers carry the replacement legs now, but if you don't have a retailer near you, you can go directly to microjig.com. We have a store section on the website, and you can buy any part for the grippers or any of our products there at the store. All right. Next up, we're going to talk about the MJ splitters. Now, this is a saw stop. My saw at home is a Delta, so the sample piece here I have is for the Delta saw, but it works the same way. If your saw has a good riving knife system set up in it, then we always recommend that you use the riving knife that comes with the saw. Now, many of you will notice that here on the saw stop, which does have a good riving knife, I'm not using the riving knife. And that's because when I'm doing the 1/4 and the 1/8 inch rip demonstrations, the standard insert that comes for the saw stop has a very large opening for the riving knife. The problem is when you're ripping 1/4 and 1/8 inch strips, they can drop into this hole, and that's dangerous. So when I'm doing those thin rips, I like to use a zero clearance insert. This is a zero clearance insert for my table saw at home, and I have this one outfitted so that it's reversible, If I want to use a thin rip blade, I use it this way with the MJ splitters in the back, or if I want to use a full kerf blade, I can use my splitters that way. So it's reversible, and I only need one plate instead of two. But basically, the MJ splitters give you a splitter behind the blade that doesn't interfere with using your grippers. They're low enough that the gripper will go right over them, even if you're cutting thin materials, but they give you the ability to keep that kerf from closing up behind your blade. When you're cutting man-made materials, MDF, melamine, plywoods, a riving knife or splitter is not as important because those materials aren't going to close a kerf behind your saw blade. But when you're cutting rough lumber or live, actual wood, if it's not dried properly, or sometimes even if it is dried properly, the way that the tree grew, there are stresses built into that wood. It's called reaction wood. And sometimes when you're ripping a piece like that, you'll notice that the kerf, as it leaves the blade, can either open up or pinch itself closed. And both are dangerous. If the kerf opens up, that means that this part is now a curve. It's pushing itself away from the fence, and it's going to engage with the blade back here where it can kick back. Or if the kerf is closing behind your blade, it can close behind the blade, pinching the rear of the blade and kicking itself back. That is the major cause of kickback with solid woods. A set of splitters, and I'll just set this on here to simulate. Splitters behind the blade or a riving knife, they keep that kerf from being able to close, or if the kerf starts to open, it's going to hit here before it hits the backside of your blade. In any case that you see the kerf either opening or closing, you need to stop what you're doing and kill the saw as quickly as possible. But the riving knife, or in this case the MJ splitters, will keep that from happening. Now, the kit that we sell comes with the splitters themselves, and it comes with a drill jig to allow you to very precisely locate these holes behind your blade. Basically, you take a piece of scrap, you cut a kerf into the piece of scrap, and then you use that kerf to set the drill guide in, and the drill guide will drill right down the center line of the kerf so that it's lined up with your blade. Now, they come in full and thin kerf sizes, but not all full kerf blades are exactly the same thickness, and not all thin kerf blades are exactly the same thickness. And so, even though you may be using a full kerf splitter, if you put let's say this blade is exactly an 1/8 inch thick, which it is, it's a brand new blade. If I set up my splitters to be exactly 1/8 of an inch thick, that's ideal. But if I then send this blade out to be sharpened, when it comes back, it's no longer going to be 1/8 of an inch thick. Or if I switch to a different thick kerf blade, it may not be exactly 1/8 of an inch thick, and I'm going to get binding back here. So the reason that we have two splitters, and you'll notice that they're marked MJ 1X, 2X, and 3X, is that the legs are offset from the body of the splitter. Each of those X's represents 3/1000ths of an inch. So I can put these on here, and depending on which ones I use, you get 4 in the set, so there's 2 of each. Depending on which ones I use and how I orient them, I have the ability to set the splitter left to right slightly to match up with my blade, or I can also set them so that they're wider or narrower together to fit the kerf, depending on the blade I'm using. So this gives me the ability to totally control the splitter where it meets the kerf. I can even set it so that these are pressing very slightly against the I can set them so that one of them is pressing very slightly against my rip fence, so it's actually helping to hold that board as I go through. So again, generally speaking, if you have a good riving knife that comes with your saw, you should use it. But for those of us with saws that don't have good riving knives, or in my case, it's too old, the MJ splitter gives you the opportunity to add a splitter for vertical cuts only, but add a splitter, get that protection at a minimal cost without having to, reconfigure your saw.
They're easy to add in and take out.
Yes, and that's the whole point. Once you've got them drilled, the drill bit comes with them, and the drill bit is sized exactly for the splitters you need, so they fit snug in the hole, but they can be added and taken away by hand. Now I am going to make one note while I'm here. The drill guide that comes with the MJ splitters is a plastic drill guide. It's really only there to locate the bit. For those who buy or have table saw inserts like this one that are phenolic, they can be very difficult to drill. They generate a lot of heat, and that heat can melt the plastic on the drill guide. So what we recommend is when you do the setup according to the instructions to drill your plate, if you're using a phenolic plate, you want to go down into the phenolic. It's step 8 on the instructions. But instead of trying to drill all the way through the phenolic, you're going to use the bit to just mark the 4 holes. Then remove it from your table saw, bring it over to a drill press, finish up the holes on the drill press. Then you know that they'll be perfectly vertical, and you won't spoil your drill guide. So if you want to do another plate in the future, you'll be able to do it. So that's one thing we recommend is for plywood plates like this one, no problem, it'll go right through and everything's good. The problem is phenolic is basically a plastic material with layers of paper molded into it, and it generates a lot of heat, and it really requires a specialized bit to drill through. But if you just mark the holes with your plastic drill guide and then finish them off at the drill press, you'll have excellent results and you'll be happy with the setup.
Does the drill guide use the kerf as an index mark?
Yes.
Okay.
What'll happen is we supply the drill guide, the splitters, the screws for mounting the drill guide, and the drill bit. What you supply is the actual zero clearance insert you're going to use. You can either make your own or buy one. And you supply a piece of material that's, if I remember correctly, 4 inches wide and about 14 inches long. And you make a kerf into that piece, not all the way through, but most of the way through, shut the saw off, unplug it, raise the blade up, and we tell you how to position it. You put the drill guide in the back side of that, and the drill guide actually locates to the kerf that you just cut. So without moving the rip fence, that kerf is perfectly lined up with your blade. But then if you switch blades and it moves that kerf fractionally in one direction or the other, by moving and changing the positioning of your splitters, you can adjust to that blade as well. So it's designed it works right off of a kerf that you cut. So you know that you're going to get a good result every time.
So you can use that after you've cut the curves on the front and the back.
Yes.
You don't have to do it with square ends.
No. Actually, the throat plate I want to be already in the saw when I drill these, or when I mark the points. Yes. The scrap piece is going to be on top of that. So yeah, I would have my piece here. I'd cut my kerf into my scrap piece, set my jig on here, and then drill through. All right. Any other questions on the splitters? Milton, how are we doing on time?
Doing great. Doing great.
All right. What's next? Next up are the dovetail clamps. I love me some dovetail clamps. MICROJIG has just introduced a new set of clamps that are forged with a 14-degree dovetail profile on the head. And what this allows us to do is anywhere that you can cut a standard 14-degree dovetail slot, you can add a clamp. So one of my favorite uses for this is here at the table saw. If you need a tall fence for the table saw, I don't have to make my tall fence and build some kind of a box structure to come around and clamp onto this fence. All I need is one piece of board, 2 dovetail cuts in it, bring the clamp down in, and it doesn't matter how high this board is, how tall it is, the clamp's going to slide right down to where I need it to be. Obviously this board is a little bit short. It should be the full length of your fence, but this is the one that travels with me when I fly on airplanes, and so I made it's short to be a sample. But and if I release one of these, you'll notice that the piece of plywood is a little bit warped, but it doesn't matter because as I set the clamp, it's tight up against the fence. So if I need to do, some kind of ripping with tall pieces, like raising the panel on a door panel, I can do that with the extra support of my tall fence without having to go through a bunch of jump through a bunch of hoops to get it made. The other piece I have. Hillary, would you pass me that? Thank you. This here is a fence that I use on my bandsaw and my drill press table at home. My drill press doesn't come with a fence. Well, it's just two pieces of plywood pocket screwed together to form a 90-degree angle, and I put a dovetail slot fronting on the face and the bottom. So when I want to clamp it to my bandsaw table, I can clamp it and use it on my bandsaw. When I want to go to my drill press, which is a larger table, it'll clamp to that. It doesn't matter how wide the piece is that I'm trying to clamp to, the dovetail clamps can adjust for it with just a single dovetail slot. And if I want to do a clamp a stop block on the face of my fence, I can clamp a stop block there too. Anywhere you can put a dovetail groove, you can add a fence. So building a router table and you're trying to figure out how you're going to position and clamp your router fence, just put a dovetail groove on each end of the fence and clamp it directly to the edges of your router table. Boom, done. The point of this, one of the real advantages, is that the head of the clamp is actually embedded inside whatever it is that you're clamping. And so the head of the clamp isn't in my way when I'm using the saw. I have a pressure board that I use for holding parts tight up against my router table fence. Well, I can clamp it to the router table with the dovetail clamps, and the clamps are inside the pressure board so they're not in my way when I'm trying to feed my stock. It's a standard 1/2-inch 14-degree dovetail bit. It's very, very common. Every manufacturer makes one, and virtually every retailer carries one. You can buy them at the big box stores, for heaven's sakes, and they're not expensive. So you don't have to go out and buy specialty bits to use this. It's a very common bit, and most woodworkers who use routers regularly already own one. The money that you save on buying aluminum T-track is worth the price of the clamps to begin with. So those are our dovetail clamps. And our newest product available now is the dado stop. Now the dado stop is designed to work with the dovetail clamp, and it locks to your saw fence. And what it allows you to do is to cut grooves in material using your miter gauge, so it's cross grooves, to be able to make things like half laps or do inlays, or when you want to get really fancy, even bridle joints can be done using the dado stop. Now let's take a look at how all that works. There it is. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of scrap, doesn't matter what kind of scrap it is, and I'm going to clamp it to my miter gauge so that it won't move. Now in this case, the only reason I'm not using the miter gauge, I'm using my little sled here, is because when I travel to various locations like this, I'm never sure what kind of miter gauge I'm going to have, whether it's going to be properly set up for the saw or whatever. And to use the dado stop, you definitely want to make sure that you have, your miter gauge is accurate. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut this piece off using the saw. Now this face that I just cut off is the exact left side of my blade where it's going to cut. Now I'm going to bring my dado stop forward, and I'm going to bring it over so that it's going to, the number one leg in the center here is going to be just barely, all I wanted is to just touch the tooth of the blade. I just want it to be rubbing there, just a little bit. I don't want to dig into the leg of my dado stop. I just want to be able to feel it rubbing. The dado stop is exactly 3 inches from here to the fence. So while I've got it in this position, I can actually come over here, and if I want to calibrate my rip scale, I can do so. I can set it to exactly 3 on the rip scale here, and now, as long as this blade is in my saw, doesn't matter if I'm ripping or cross-cutting, my rip fence is now accurate. I don't have to use a tape measure anymore. But in the meantime, I'm going to bring this over. Now, number 1 leg is on the left side of the right side of the blade, and I'm going to bring leg number 2 over so that it's touching that piece that I just cut. So the difference between leg 1 and leg 2 is now my kerf. That's my blade. Now I can get rid of this piece because I don't need it anymore. And I'm going to back my dado stop up. Now what makes the dado stop so cool, half laps are a very common joint in woodworking, but in order to make one and get it to fit nicely, you've got to precisely set things up. You set up a dado blade, you make test cuts. We eliminate all of that. What we're going to do is use the actual stock to set the jig. So I'm going to put a groove in this piece, and I'm going to do it so that this piece fits into the groove. Now, we made this while we were playing today. I have no idea how thick this piece is. I don't care how thick it is. I don't need to know. Bring this over a little bit. I'm going to use this piece itself to set the number 3 leg. So I put a square across the number 2 leg, and then I use the number 3 leg using the part itself to set the width of my dado. And now the difference between 1 and 3 is this wide minus the thickness of the blade. So we've accounted for everything. So I'm going to lower my blade down. And again, I know that this is 3 inches from here to the fence. I could set to about 3.5 on the scale, but we don't have a scale here, so I am going to have to use a tape measure. I'll set the 3.5 so that I have a 1/2 inch shoulder before the cut. And it doesn't have to be precise in this case because it's a demo. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut one shoulder of this cut is going to be done off of leg 1, and then the other shoulder will be done off of leg 2, and then we'll just waste away anything left in the middle. Now that center section, I can just waste that away. And you get a snug fit every time. No measuring, no marking, no setup. I can do that with a piece of veneer. If I've got an inlay that I want to wrap around a table leg, for example, I can set this up using the veneer as my gauge, the actual piece of veneer. I can do all 4 sides of the leg on a flat section and wrap the inlay around it. If you want to inlay a piece of brass or something onto a piece that you're making, again, since you're using what's going in the slot to make the gauge, to set the gauge, to set the dado stop, you're going to get a perfect fit every time with no setup, no measuring, no marking, and no test cuts. It's a brilliant little device, and it works very, very well. So for the other thing is, if you're using a miter gauge here, you can actually do angled half laps with it. You can do angled grooves, as long as you set up and can touch both of these legs with your part at an angle. You'll be able to cut within limits. You can cut angled half laps as well. So it's a very cool tool. It's brand new. It only came out in October of last year, but they've been selling like hotcakes. People love them. So that's the dado stop. Now, we have one more product that I want to talk about before we're done today. Any questions on the dado stop? Okay. You'll notice that I have my little sled here that I'm using with the miter gauge, and that has our zero play guide bar on the bottom of it. The zero play guide bar, no, I'll just do it from here, that's fine. When I travel from state to state and from store to store doing these demos, I'm working on all kinds of different saws, different brands, different types. Although all of them have a nominally 3/4 inch wide miter gauge, miter slot, none of them are exactly 3/4 of an inch. So the zero play guide bar is an adjustable piece that allows me to set up and create a guide bar that will exactly fit whatever miter slot I'm working with, nominally 3/4 of an inch thick. The actual bar comes with set screws, and it's made up of 2 pieces. So there's 2 pieces here that slide against each other, and you see there's a little ramp here and another one back here and another one in the middle. So they guide, and you can see that it gets wider and narrower as you slide them together. So this allows me to adjust to any miter slot from 0.73 inches wide to 0.79 inches wide. Basically, the only saws this doesn't fit are some of the lower end table saws have a 5/8 slot instead of a 3/4. The zero play guide bar will not work with those, but it will work with with any nominally 3/4. We haven't found a saw yet that it doesn't work with that has a 3/4 slot. And what you want to do is you want to
It also works with shop slot.
any 3/4 inch slot.
Yeah.
So what I want to do is I want to drop it down into the slot in the narrowest configuration, and then push the 2 pieces together until they're snug in the slot. Then at that point, once I get it, and I can feel how snug it is, then there are lock screws that I want to lock into place. And now it won't move. I don't have my glasses on, so I can't really see what I'm doing. And so now this is set, and I can flip it over, and you'll notice that there are also 3 holes in here for the, actually this one. These are your 3 mounting holes. So when I go to put my jig on, all I need to know is that these holes are 4 inches apart, center to center. So I've in this case, I drilled a couple of sets of locating holes to, I think that's on there. So then I'll drop this down into the slot, I'll put my screws in place, and now all I have to do is square this up with I make the holes just a little bit oversized, and I can use my gripper to ensure that it's lined up so everything's perpendicular to or parallel to the face, to the fence. Lock it down. And by the way, the kit comes with all of these little screws, even the mounting screws I'm using here. It's all 1032 hardware, so if you need a longer mounting screw for a thicker jig, no problem. And now the zero play guide bar lets me use my miter saw on any kind of a jig I want to build. What I like about it, what sets it apart from the miter gauge that, I don't know where your miter gauge is, but even if you buy a miter bar, anyone that's made out of metal, whether it's steel or aluminum, because these are all different size slots, those bars have to be made less than 3/4 of an inch. And then there's some kind of mechanism built into them, either a spreader or you'll have a spreader, or this one has set screws that you can adjust the bar to precisely fit your miter slot. The problem is that what you're really getting, you've got 3 set screws, or these are little, looks like little balls. They're little metal balls that ride against the sides. But you only have 3 points of contact in actuality. The main part of the bar is not touching the miter slot. With the zero play guide bar, it's 9 inches long, and you're getting full contact between the miter slot side and the jig all the way through the 9-inch length on both sides. So when I bring it back here, even though I'm mostly off the miter slot, there's still zero play. When I bring it all the way forward like so, there's zero play, even though I'm not completely contained, because you get full contact. It also tends to slide a little more nicely because this is a glass-filled nylon material that it wears very well, and it slides nicely. Now, generally wear is not a problem, but if you were to use this in a production shop day in and day out, eventually it would wear and get a little loose. Well, because it's adjustable, no problem. All you've got to do is take it off, refit it to your miter slot, lock it down again, put it all back together, and you're back in business for another 5 years. The zero play guide bar, I'm a jig and fixture maker from way back. The zero play guide bar is definitely one of my favorite MICROJIG products because it allows the woodworker to build whatever jigs and fixtures and sleds they can imagine. And it's not limited to just the table saw. Many router tables have a miter slot in them. You can adjust it to that miter slot. Many bandsaws have miter slots in them. You can adjust it to that. So anywhere you want to use a miter slot to guide a jig, the zero play guide bar is definitely your friend. Now, with the zero play system, we have the hand me that box right behind you there. Yeah. I didn't take it out of the box. Somewhere in here. Well, that's weird. Oh, here it is. Sorry. My bad. There's another zero play. We also make the zero play stop. And now this only works with T-track miter slots. Not all miter slot, 3/4 miter slots are T-track slots. This one has it's milled out further underneath, and the stop slides into that T. If your saw doesn't have a T, you're not going to be able to use the stop. But it comes with a little set screw. I can set this where I want it, turn the set screw and lock it into place, and then that becomes a stop for my zero play guide bar. Once I hit it, I won't go any further. So if I've got a jig that I don't want to cut all the way through, I can set a stop and it'll remind me where to stop each time. But the other thing is, even when you're not using it with the zero play guide bars, it comes with a hole through the center, and you'll notice that the underside of that hole is both a round and an oval. It can be used with T-bolts, or it comes with a carriage bolt, which slides through there. And now this can be used as a holding fixture. Anything you want to clamp in your miter slot can now be clamped in your miter slot using, as soon as you put a piece of material through here and tighten the knob, you've locked it in place. Ideal for, setting a featherboard or a thin rip jig, or if you want to do cove cutting on the table saw, the cove jig, you want to clamp it on an angle across the blade. Well, with two of these, you can set that to whatever angle you want, clamp it down, and you're good to go. Very, very useful tool if you're a jig and fixture maker. The zero play series of products is definitely something you want to play with, that you want to have in your arsenal. And again, with the zero play, in the case of the zero play stop, the carriage bolt comes with it, the washer comes with it, the knob comes with it, the little nylon stop comes with it. We supply you. You even get the Allen screw for locking down your zero play guide bar. We pretty much supply you with all of the hardware you need to get started with our products, so that you can get started right away.
These come single or double?
They come in a single pack where you get one of the zero plays, or you can buy a kit that has two of the zero play guide bars and two of the stops all in one kit. Again, if you have a T-slot miter slot on your saw, the kit is a good buy. If you don't, then you'd want to buy the zero plays individually because you don't need the stops.
We're at 3,000 viewers and 50 live viewers right now.
Cool. All right. So, unless I've missed something, Henry, did I miss anything, or did I cover the whole line now? I think I've covered it all. So, unless you guys have any other questions, for those of you watching on Facebook Live, again, this has been the entire MICROJIG product line described and shown to you from Factor, here, Makerspace here in Orlando, Florida. You can find them at factor.org. If you're interested in more information about Factor or want to become a member if you live in the Orlando area, it's factor.org. And we thank them for giving us the space here and letting us do this live demo. And we thank you for joining us. We'll see you around again. MICROJIG.com and our MICROJIG YouTube channel carry lots and lots of information on our products, things you can do with them, tips and tricks, and instructions.